grave whisper.
I've always been drawn to places with a history, places that carry the echoes of the past. But nothing prepared me for the Whaley House in San Diego, California. Standing on the corner of Orange and Island, the house looks serene during the day. Its white walls and symmetrical windows make it seem almost like a portrait from another century. Yet, when you cross the threshold, you feel it, the weight of centuries, the presence of lives that refuse to let go. Built in 1857 by Thomas Whaley, a businessman with a sharp mind and a keen eye for real estate, the house was never just a home. It was a hub for commerce, a theater, a family dwelling, and, as legend would have it, a place of unimaginable sorrow. I remember the first time I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet, not as if to warn me of my intrusion, but as if they recognized me, an outsider, uninvited yet expected. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the sense that I was being watched. People often say the Whaley House is haunted. Paranormal enthusiasts, skeptics, tourists, they all come looking for a thrill, a ghost story they can take home. But the first time I visited, I realized this wasn't just about stories. It was about something more, something alive. They say the house is haunted by multiple spirits. Thomas Whaley himself is said to linger in the halls, overseeing the legacy he built, perhaps regretting choices he made, perhaps protecting his family even in death. There's Anna, his daughter, who tragically died young, and the specter of Yankee Jim Robinson, a convicted criminal who was executed on the property before the house was built. They say his angry spirit never left, forever bound to the land where he drew his final breath. I moved from room to room, my footsteps muffled by the thick rugs that still adorned the house. The first thing that struck me was the temperature. It dropped suddenly in certain areas, so cold that I could see my breath misting in the air. I knew immediately this wasn't a draft from the old windows. No, this was something else, something that had been there long before I arrived. Then I heard it, the faintest whisper. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but it came again, a low, deliberate murmur, almost like a name. I froze, trying to catch the words, but they slipped away, fading into the silence. My skin crawled. I told myself it was probably the wind, but the whisper had weight, a presence. It belonged to someone or something. I made my way to the old theater room, once used by the Whaleys for performances. The room smelled faintly of mildew and candle wax, like a memory that refused to fade. And then I saw it, a shadow moving across the stage. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I caught the outline of a man in mid-stride, frozen for just a second before vanishing entirely. My rational mind screamed at me to leave. It shouted about optical illusions, tired eyes, and creaky old houses, but I couldn't. There was a pull, a gravity to the place that demanded I stay, that whispered secrets I wasn't supposed to hear, yet couldn't resist. And then the footsteps began. Not mine, not the ones I had heard earlier in the foyer, but heavy, deliberate footsteps, pacing slowly above me on the upper floor. I remember looking up, expecting to see a shadow at the window, a door creaking open, but the upper hall remained empty, and still the steps continued.
It's moments like that when you realize that fear isn't just an emotion, it's a signal, a message from a world that exists alongside ours, brushing against our reality in fleeting, terrifying moments. I could feel the eyes on me, dozens of them, unseen yet palpable. They were assessing me, judging my presence, and in that instant I understood. This house doesn't welcome visitors, it tolerates them. I left that day with a lingering chill, a sense of being followed, though no one was there. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been marked, that the house had taken notice of my curiosity and my audacity, and I knew I had to return, because stories, real stories, don't unfold in a single visit. They unravel slowly, in whispers, in shadows, in cold drafts that brush against the back of your neck. I didn't know it then, but my first encounter with the Whaley House was only the beginning. What I saw, what I felt, was just the surface of something much darker, something that had been waiting patiently for someone like me to step inside and listen. And I did.
Returning to the Whaley House wasn't easy. The first time I had walked away with a chill crawling along my spine. I told myself I'd been foolish, caught up in the allure of ghost stories and historical fascination. But curiosity is a dangerous companion. It gnaws at your resolve until you give in, until you step across that threshold again, willingly. And so, one overcast afternoon, I found myself standing before the white facade of the Whaley House once more. The air smelled faintly of salt and decay, as if the Pacific itself whispered warnings I was too stubborn to heed. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and immediately the atmosphere pressed against me. This wasn't just cold, it was heavy. The kind of cold that seemed to seep into your bones, carrying with it a faint tang of something metallic, like blood long dried but never fully gone. I paused in the foyer, letting my eyes adjust. The sunlight outside failed to pierce the shadows here, and the house seemed to inhale and exhale with a life of its own. I started toward the staircase, my hand brushing the polished wooden banister, and that's when I felt it, a subtle vibration beneath my fingers, as if the wood itself was alive, aware of my presence. I froze. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, faintly, I heard a sigh, not from the walls, not from the air, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere human, or at least it had once been human. The first room I entered was the parlor. Furniture draped in white cloths gave the impression that the family might return at any moment, unaware that I had invaded their space. I imagined the Whaleys moving through these rooms, laughing, arguing, living their lives. And then I imagined their deaths. The tragedies that had unfolded here weren't whispered in newspapers. They lingered, carried in the very fibers of this house. Suddenly, a door at the end of the hallway slammed shut, startling me. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was the wind, though the windows were firmly closed. And yet, I had the uncanny feeling that someone or something was watching me, testing me, not cruelly, but deliberately, gauging whether I belonged here, whether I was capable of understanding what the house demanded. I made my way to the old theater room, a place Thomas Whaley had once used for performances and social gatherings. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching unnaturally along the walls. I noticed a faint outline on the stage, a stain that didn't seem to belong to the floorboards. My stomach twisted. Was it a shadow? A memory left behind by some tragic event? Or the residue of Yankee Jim Robinson, whose spirit was said to haunt this place with vengeance and despair? Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not above this time,
but behind me, slow, deliberate, pacing across the wooden floor. I didn't dare turn around. I felt the vibration in the air, the subtle shift in temperature, as if someone had passed mere inches from me. My instinct screamed to run, but my curiosity anchored me in place. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. No answer came, only the creak of the floor and the faint, almost imperceptible sound of breathing, not my own, not human, something ancient, something waiting. I walked to the staircase, and as I ascended, I noticed it, a fleeting figure at the landing, a shadow that froze for a heartbeat before dissolving into the darkness. I could feel its gaze on me, cold and unyielding. My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to turn back, to leave, to pretend this was all in my mind, but I knew better. The Whaley House doesn't let its visitors leave unchanged. Upstairs, the bedrooms were silent, yet alive. One particular drew me closer, the room once occupied by Anna Whaley, the daughter who had died tragically young. The air here was heavier, almost viscous, and the temperature plummeted so suddenly that I could see my breath mist in front of my face. And then I felt it, an invisible hand brush against my shoulder. I spun around. Nothing, only the echo of a laugh, high-pitched, fleeting, and terribly sad. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, and I realized the house was shifting. The layout I remembered from the first visit had changed slightly. Doors appeared where there hadn't been doors before. Shadows lingered longer than they should, and through it all, I sensed a pattern, a rhythm to the haunting. The Whaley House wasn't random. It had memory, and memory demanded attention. I sat down on the edge of an old bed, trying to steady myself, my eyes scanning the walls for any signs of life or unlife, and then I heard it clearly this time, a whisper in the darkness, dragging across the air like a slow knife. "Leave while you can." But I didn't. I couldn't, because already the house had my curiosity, my fear, and my respect. It was pulling me deeper into a story that was older and darker than I had imagined, and I had only just begun to listen.
By the third visit, I was no longer just a curious observer. The Whaley House had become something more, a presence that wrapped itself around me, tugging at my nerves, demanding my attention, testing my courage. I could feel it the moment I stepped onto the creaking porch. The white paint had dulled with age, and the corners of the windows seemed to stare at me like dark, unblinking eyes. And then the door opened as if by its own volition, or perhaps by invitation. Inside, the house smelled of old wood, dust, and something else I couldn't name. Something acrid and metallic, like iron scorched by fire. The foyer seemed smaller somehow, walls pressing in on me. I hesitated, letting my gaze travel over the portraits of the Whaley family that lined the walls. Their eyes followed me, not in the way a photograph captures a likeness, but in the way the air itself seemed to shift with their attention. It was unnerving, and yet I moved forward, compelled to confront whatever waited within. I headed straight to the kitchen, a room that had been a hub of family life, the heart of the home. The temperature plummeted suddenly, my breath steaming in front of me. I was certain I wasn't alone. And then I heard it, the sound of dishes clattering, as though someone or something had knocked them from a shelf. I spun around. The cabinets were closed, the counters empty, and yet the echo lingered, a reminder that the house had a memory, and memories could move, shift, and haunt. The hallways upstairs seemed to elongate unnaturally, stretching out like a maze designed to disorient.
I stopped outside Anna Whaley's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, though I had left it closed in previous visits. A chill radiated from within, stronger than anything I had felt before. My hand hovered over the knob. I swallowed hard, knowing that opening this door could change everything. And then I turned it slowly. The room was empty, or so it appeared. The bedspread had shifted, the pillows slightly askew, though no wind disturbed the air. Then I saw it, a small, pale handprint on the window pane, smudged as if pressed by a child long ago. My pulse quickened. I reached out, but it was gone the instant I touched the glass. My rational mind tried to convince me it was condensation, a trick of light, but I knew better. Something had been there. Something had been waiting for me. Suddenly, a sound erupted from the floor above, a loud, rapid pounding, like someone running, stomping, and then stopping abruptly. My heart raced. I had never heard footsteps move with such urgency. My first instinct was to flee, but I was rooted in place. Slowly, deliberately, I climbed the stairs, each creak underfoot sounding like a gunshot in the silence. At the landing, the air was thick, almost suffocating. Shadows pooled in the corners of the hallway, darker than they should have been. And then I saw him, Yankee Jim Robinson. His figure was vague at first, more of a silhouette than a person, but there was no mistaking the intensity of his gaze. His eyes glowed faintly, furious and accusatory. He raised a hand, pointing at me, and I felt the weight of his judgment settle onto my chest. I staggered back, breathless, but he was gone the instant I blinked. I stumbled into the next room, trying to shake off the vision, but the house wasn't done with me. I heard whispers, hundreds of voices layered atop one another, murmuring names, dates, warnings, and regrets. Leave. Don't touch. Remember me. The voices were faint, yet undeniable, pressing against the edges of my sanity. I covered my ears, but the sound persisted, echoing inside my skull. I collapsed onto the floor, trying to ground myself, when I felt a cold presence settle beside me. I dared not look, fearing what I might see. And then a voice, soft and sorrowful, whispered my name. Not just any voice, it carried the weight of decades, the grief of a child lost, of lives ended too soon. Stay with us, it said. The words weren't threatening exactly. They were insistent, binding. I realized then that the Whaley House wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Not in the sense that it moved or breathed, but that it remembered. Every tragedy, every sorrow, every fleeting joy had left an imprint, and I was now part of that imprint. My fear, my curiosity, my very presence was woven into the fabric of this house. I left that day shaken, every nerve on edge, but despite the terror, there was a part of me that hungered for more. The house had secrets yet to reveal, and I had begun a journey I couldn't turn back from. Every shadow, every whisper, every cold touch called me deeper into the heart of the Whaley House. And I would answer.
When I returned to the Whaley House for my fourth visit, I no longer felt like an intruder. The house had claimed a piece of me already. My footsteps felt measured, almost ritualistic as I crossed the threshold. Even the familiar scent of aged wood and mildew seemed more vivid, more insistent, as if the house were greeting me, acknowledging that I had returned for answers it alone could provide. The foyer was quiet, too quiet. No groaning floorboards, no whispers carried on the air. For a moment I thought the house had abandoned me, but then I heard it, the soft scrape of a chair against the wooden floor in the parlor. I didn't need to see who or what had moved it. The sound carried a presence, and I knew instinctively that someone unseen had been sitting there, waiting, watching. I moved toward the grand staircase, the one that led to the upper rooms where the Whaley children once slept. Each step creaked beneath my weight, echoing through the empty halls. Shadows danced along the walls, shifting unnaturally. It wasn't the fading light outside playing tricks. These shadows had depth, substance, as though they existed in a space beyond the ordinary world. Then I saw her, Anna Whaley, or at least what I could only describe as her apparition. She stood at the far end of the hallway, pale and ethereal, her eyes fixed on me with a look that was both sorrowful and accusing. Her hand lifted slowly, beckoning me forward. The air around her shimmered, distorting, like heat waves rising from asphalt, but chilling, not warm. My chest tightened. My mind screamed to turn and run, yet my body obeyed a different, unexplainable force. As I approached, the temperature plummeted further. My breath became visible in dense clouds, curling and twisting in front of me. The whispers returned, hundreds of them overlapping, a chorus of the lost. Stay, remember, don't leave, stay. I felt their presence pressing against my skin, brushing my hair, tugging at my sleeves. The house was alive, more alive than any living being I had ever encountered. Suddenly, a loud bang erupted behind me. I spun around to see the old piano in the corner of the room playing itself, keys depressed, released in rapid, chaotic succession. The sound was discordant, like the house itself was screaming in agony. Then silence fell again, thick and absolute. My heart pounded, my ears ringing from the sudden eruption. I wanted to rationalize it, blame the wind or some mechanical flaw, but rational thought had no power here. I continued up the hallway, drawn toward the room where Thomas Whaley had once conducted business, the room where Yankee Jim Robinson had been executed long before the house was built. I felt a pressure building, something tangible, like a weight on my chest, and then I saw him. His shadow moved along the walls, stretching impossibly tall, dark, menacing. His face remained hidden in darkness, but his anger radiated outward, palpable, a suffocating presence that made every nerve in my body scream. I tried to speak, to break the silence, but no words came. Only a low, guttural growl reverberated through the hall, echoing off the walls. The house vibrated with it, and for a moment I felt the very foundation tremble beneath me. I realized that this wasn't just haunting, this was history reaching through time, dragging the horrors of death, betrayal, and loss into the present. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the room fell silent. The shadows dissolved, leaving only the faint outline of the furniture and the lingering chill in the air. I was trembling now, my body shaken, my mind reeling, and yet I felt an undeniable pull forward. The Whaley House was not finished with me, not by a long shot. Every creak, every whisper, every cold brush against my skin was a reminder that I was only beginning to understand the depth of its story. I left that night exhausted, the air outside heavy with fog. My hands were still cold from the encounters inside, and my mind was buzzing with images of shadows, phantoms, and unrelenting sorrow. I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The Whaley House does not merely contain ghosts, it contains memory, emotion, history itself, and it shares those things with anyone who dares to enter. As I walked away, the house seemed to watch me. In the darkness behind its windows, I imagined faint glowing eyes tracking my retreat, silently marking me, acknowledging that I would return. And I would. Because once you hear the whispers of the Whaley House, once you feel the brush of spirits against your skin, the stories do not let go.
By the 5th visit, I no longer questioned the Whaley House's hold over me. Every creak, every shadow, every chill in the air felt like a summons I could neither resist nor escape. I stepped onto the porch, hesitated, and then crossed the threshold, my hand brushing against the worn wood of the door frame. The house exhaled a familiar, chilling welcome. Inside, the foyer seemed smaller than ever, as if the walls were leaning closer, pressing in. I noticed the portraits along the walls, their eyes glinting in the dim light, seemingly more alive. And I realized something unnerving. The expressions on their faces seemed to change subtly, watching me, reacting to me. It was as if the house itself was sentient, measuring my fear, testing my courage. I made my way upstairs, determined to confront the rooms where the most intense hauntings had occurred. The hallway stretched out, shadows pooling in corners like ink. The air was dense, electric, charged with an energy I couldn't name. And then I heard the whispers, low, urgent, overlapping. You shouldn't be here. Leave. Listen. Beware. The voices weren't just sounds, they were commands, warnings, tugging at the edges of my mind, making me question my own judgment. I paused outside Anna Whaley's bedroom. The door, once closed in my previous visit, now stood wide open. A cold draft spilled out, carrying with it a faint scent of flowers, decayed and sweet. The room was empty, or so it seemed. Then I saw the chair rocking gently, as though pushed by an unseen hand. My pulse raced. I stepped closer, and the temperature dropped drastically, my breath forming misty clouds in front of my face. Suddenly, a figure appeared by the window, a girl, pale and fragile-looking, her long dress flowing as if caught in a breeze that didn't exist. Anna, or at least her spirit. She turned toward me, eyes hollow yet accusing, and I felt a weight press down on my chest, a suffocating force that made it nearly impossible to breathe. The whispers became louder, faster, overlapping into a dissonant chorus. Stay, listen, remember. I could feel the energy of the room trying to pull me in, bind me to its history. I stumbled back into the hallway, desperate to escape, but the house wasn't finished with me. From the staircase above, I heard the slow, deliberate pacing of heavy footsteps, Yankee Jim Robinson. Each step echoed like a drumbeat in the silent house, filling every corner with menace. I couldn't see him, yet I knew he was there. I felt the gaze of 100 unseen eyes, judging, assessing, perhaps angry at my intrusion. Then came a sudden crash. A painting fell from the wall, glass shattering on the wooden floor. The sound reverberated through the house, and for a moment I saw shadows twisting in unnatural shapes along the walls. My heart raced, my legs trembled, yet some inextricable part of me, some stubborn, foolish curiosity kept me rooted in place. I entered Thomas Whaley's old office, where he had kept ledgers, plans, and memories of a family's triumphs and tragedies. The room was empty, but the air was thick with unseen presence. A chair moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, and I swore I saw a figure seated behind the desk, shifting slightly as if adjusting papers that weren't there. I heard a voice, low and almost human, whispering my name. "Why do you return?" I wanted to answer, to speak, but my voice failed. The house demanded silence, obedience, attention. I felt the walls closing in, the floorboards vibrating underfoot. Shadows gathered in the corners, coalescing into shapes that were human enough to terrify, but distorted enough to make my mind question reality.
And then, out of nowhere, the piano in the corner began to play, a slow, mournful melody that filled the room, each note a dirge for lives lost, for grief that had never faded. I dropped to my knees, overwhelmed by the weight of centuries of sorrow, anger, and regret that clung to this place. I realized the Whaley House was more than a house. It was a vessel, a repository for every emotion, every tragedy, every injustice that unfolded on this land, and it was reaching for me, entwining me into its story, making me a part of its legacy whether I wanted to or not. When I finally left that day, the air outside felt thin and sharp, the fog curling around my feet. My hands were still cold, my mind buzzing with images of shadows, whispers, and the relentless pressure of unseen eyes. And yet, there was a part of me that was drawn forward, that hungered to return, to uncover more of the story that only this haunted house could tell. Because one truth became undeniable. The Whaley House doesn't just haunt, it remembers. And anyone who steps inside becomes a part of its memory, willingly or not.
By the 6th visit, I had come to understand one unshakable truth. The Whaley House was no ordinary haunting. It was a living record of sorrow, rage, and loss, layered into the very walls, floorboards, and shadows. Each time I crossed the threshold, I felt like I was stepping into a heartbeat that belonged to another century, a heartbeat heavy with tragedy, impossible to ignore. The foyer greeted me with the usual cold, but this time it was deeper, sharper, like a blade tracing across my skin. I could feel the house watching, sensing my hesitation, my fear, my desire to know more. The portraits lining the walls seemed more than mere paint and canvas. They were sentinels, observing, judging, warning. I passed them quickly, my eyes darting, aware that each glance seemed to follow me, imprinting my presence into the memory of the house. Upstairs, the hallway stretched endlessly, shadows pooling in every corner. I reached the door to Anna Whaley's room, the one where her presence had been strongest on my previous visits. It stood ajar, light filtering through in thin streaks that did nothing to soften the darkness within. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it, a cold weight pressing against my chest, constricting my breathing, as if the air itself was infused with grief. Then I saw her again, Anna, pale, delicate, her hair falling like a curtain across her face. She raised her eyes to meet mine, hollow and sorrowful, yet piercingly aware. Her hand reached out, and I felt a chill ripple through my body, as if her touch had passed through me. And then she vanished, leaving only the whisper of her voice lingering in the room. "Why do you come?" I barely had time to recover when the temperature dropped further, ice crawling along my arms. From the corner of the room, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone or something dragging itself across the floor. The creak of heavy boots, Yankee Jim Robinson. I didn't need to look. I could feel the malice radiating from him, the sense of anger that had been preserved here for over a century. The air became thick, oppressive, vibrating with tension. Suddenly, a shadow darted across the room, too quick for the eye to follow. A chair toppled over, glass shattered, and the whispers became louder, layering into an overwhelming chorus. They spoke names, dates, memories. Remember, don't leave, stay, feel. I staggered back, heart racing, as the room seemed to expand and contract, the walls breathing around me. Every sense screamed danger, yet curiosity, foolish, persistent curiosity, kept me rooted in place. I stumbled toward the staircase leading to the attic, the most isolated part of the house. The air here was thicker, darker, almost viscous.
Shadows shifted independently of the dim light, forming shapes that were horrifically human, yet grotesquely distorted. The whispers converged into a single pleading voice. "Don't forget us. Don't turn away." I felt tears prick at my eyes, not just from fear, but from the weight of centuries of sorrow compressed in that room. The attic itself was a study in madness. Boxes of old belongings lay scattered, thick with dust. A rocking chair moved back and forth, slowly, with no one in it. And then I saw the specter of Thomas Whaley standing near the far wall. His expression was unreadable, stern, mournful, almost accusatory. I felt the intensity of his presence, the unspoken message that his family, his life, and the tragedies that had unfolded here were all trapped in this house, and now so was I. The room shook suddenly, like the house itself had exhaled violently. Shadows writhed along the walls, whispering names I couldn't recognize, moving faster, more aggressively. A cold hand brushed my shoulder. I spun, and there was nothing, yet the sensation lingered, heavy, electric, impossible to ignore. My chest heaved, my mind raced, and I realized that I was no longer a visitor. I had become a participant, drawn unwillingly into the legacy of this house. When I left the attic, the house was silent again, eerily calm, as if nothing had occurred. But I knew better. The Whaley House was patient. It waited, it remembered, and it had already marked me as someone who would return. I walked into the night fog, trembling, exhausted, my heart still pounding from what I had seen, heard, and felt. Yet even as I crossed the street, even as the glow of the city felt safe, I couldn't shake the pull of a place that demanded attention, that whispered endlessly, that lived and breathed its ghosts. I understood one terrifying fact. The Whaley House didn't simply haunt, it enveloped, it absorbed, it remembered, and anyone who dared step inside became a part of that memory, caught in the endless echo of its sorrow, terror, and mystery.
By the 7th visit, I no longer approached the Whaley House with caution. Curiosity had shifted into obsession. Every shadow, every cold gust, every whisper had become a siren's call I could not resist. The house seemed to recognize me now, greeting me not as a stranger, but as a returning witness to its history, a willing participant in its legacy of sorrow. The moment I stepped into the foyer, the air changed. It pressed against my skin, thick and cold, carrying the faint metallic tang of old blood. The portraits on the walls seemed different this time. Their eyes weren't just following me, they were watching me, studying me, almost as if the house itself had assigned them to assess my worthiness, my courage, my resolve. Upstairs, the hallways stretched unnaturally. Shadows clung to corners and edges, moving independently, shifting like living creatures. I reached Anna Whaley's bedroom first. The door stood wide open, though I had left it closed during my last visit. The room was frozen in an eerie stillness, yet alive with unseen energy. My breath puffed in misty clouds, and the chill was so sharp it felt like knives against my skin. Then I saw her, Anna, standing near the window. Her form was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes seemed to hold centuries of grief and unspoken accusations. She tilted her head slightly, and I felt the weight of her gaze pierce my very soul. Slowly, she extended a hand toward me. The room's temperature plummeted further, and my chest tightened. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even blink
blink without feeling her presence draw closer, pressing against my consciousness. Suddenly, the whispers erupted. Hundreds of voices layered atop one another, shouting names, dates, warnings, and pleas. Leave, stay, remember, beware. The chorus built into a roar, shaking the room in waves I could feel in my bones. The shadows coalesced into human forms, moving violently yet fluidly, their faces blurred and grotesque. I realized that the Whaley House had shifted from a silent observer into an active, sentient entity intent on overwhelming me. I stumbled into the hallway, heart hammering, and then the pounding began. Footsteps, heavy and relentless, echoing from above. Yankee Jim Robinson. Each step resonated with fury, with centuries of anger preserved and intensified in this place. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate under the force of his presence. I wanted to flee, to escape into the night fog outside, but some invisible tether pulled me further inside. The parlor erupted next. The piano played violently, keys striking themselves in the discordant, frenzied rhythm. Chairs toppled, the walls groaned, and the shadows surged outward, moving faster, more aggressively, almost sentient. I felt a cold hand brush my shoulder, again, then another and another, though no one was visible. The room seemed alive, breathing, pulsing with the memory and grief of every soul who had ever inhabited it. I ran to the staircase leading to the attic, desperate to escape the chaos below. But even there, the house met me with resistance. Shadows stretched along the walls, forming humanoid shapes, their faces twisted in silent screams. A chair rocked violently in the corner, and a whisper directly behind me hissed my name, closer than any whisper had been before. Why do you return? Then I saw Thomas Whaley's figure emerging from the shadows near the far wall. His face was unreadable, stern, mournful, impossibly real. His eyes bored into mine, as if weighing my courage, my intent, my very soul. The attic seemed to pulse around him, every object vibrating with the weight of history, every shadow whispering secrets of lives lost, mistakes made, and tragedies that could never be undone. The room shook violently, as if the house itself was exhaling in fury. Shadows writhed and twisted, figures overlapping, hundreds of presences pressing against my consciousness. I felt tears streaming down my face, not just from fear, but from the overwhelming sorrow, grief, and anger that seemed to fill every corner of this haunted place. When I finally stumbled out into the foggy night, the house fell silent. The air was still, calm, but I knew the Whaley House was patient. It waited, it remembered, and it had already claimed a part of me. Every visit, every whisper, every shadow had bound me tighter into its story. I could run, I could leave, but I would never truly escape. Because the Whaley House doesn't just haunt its visitors, it envelops them. It imprints itself on their memory, their fears, their very soul.
By the 8th visit, I understood something terrifying. The Whaley House was not just haunted, it was sentient. It remembered every tragedy, every sorrow, every act of violence, and it demanded attention. I stepped through the front door with a mix of dread and anticipation, knowing that each visit drew me further into its dark memory, its labyrinth of shadow and grief. The air inside was colder than ever, dense with an oppressive heaviness that pressed against my chest. The portraits along the walls seemed to shift subtly as I passed, the faces altering, their eyes narrowing or widening.
some glinting with anger, others with sorrow. I could almost hear them whispering, names, dates, fragments of conversations long ended. Each footstep I took echoed like a drumbeat, announcing my intrusion into their domain. I moved to the hallway leading to the bedrooms, the wooden floorboards groaning beneath me. Shadows clung to the corners of the hall, stretching unnaturally, twisting with a life of their own. I paused outside Anna Whaley's room. The door stood ajar, a pale light spilling into the hallway. I could feel the pull, stronger this time, drawing me inside. The house wanted me here, and I had no choice but to obey. Inside, the room was frozen in silence. Dust motes floated in the thin light, motionless yet heavy with the weight of unseen presence. Then I saw her, Anna, standing near the window, her eyes hollow and filled with centuries of grief. She turned toward me, and I felt the chill of her gaze penetrate my very soul. She lifted her hand slowly, beckoning me forward, and I felt the room contract around me, the air thickening, my breath coming in ragged clouds. The whispers started again, dozens of voices overlapping, a chorus of sorrow and anger. Remember, don't forget, stay, listen. Each voice carried a memory, a moment of tragedy, a life interrupted. I felt them pressing against my mind, their weight almost physical. I stumbled back, heart pounding, as the shadows in the corners began to move independently, forming humanoid shapes, faces twisted in silent screams. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, and a presence brushed against my shoulder, Yankee Jim Robinson. His figure coalesced from shadow, taller and more menacing than before. I could feel his fury radiating, centuries of injustice and rage bound into a single malevolent form. He moved toward me, steps echoing like gunshots, and I felt my knees weaken under the pressure of his anger. I tried to speak, to call out, but my voice was gone. The room seemed to pulse with life, shadows surging around me, pressing in, moving closer, faster. The old piano in the corner began to play on its own, keys striking in chaotic, mournful rhythm. Chairs toppled, a vase shattered, and I felt the invisible hands of the house brush against my skin, pulling me into the memory it had preserved. Then I saw Thomas Whaley, his figure standing rigid near the far wall, his eyes locked onto mine, unreadable but intense. He gestured toward the floorboards, and I saw the faint outline of Yankee Jim's execution site beneath the dust, a grim reminder of the tragedies that had unfolded here long before I arrived. The house's energy intensified, and I realized that it was not merely showing me these events, it was making me relive them. The sorrow, the fear, the despair, they were tangible, flowing into me, testing my limits, my very sanity. The walls seemed to pulse, the shadows twisting into grotesque, almost human forms. Voices layered into a deafening roar, screaming names, dates, unfinished sentences. The air became suffocating, each breath a struggle, each heartbeat amplified by the oppressive energy around me. I dropped to my knees, my mind spinning, my vision blurred with tears and cold mist. I realized I had crossed a threshold. The Whaley House had claimed more than my curiosity. It had claimed my very consciousness, tethering me to its memory. When I finally stumbled out into the foggy night, the chill clinging to my bones, I felt both relief and dread. The house had released me, but only partially. I knew with absolute certainty that I was bound to return, that its whispers, shadows, and memories would haunt me wherever I went. The Whaley House does not release its visitors fully.
Once you step inside, it marks you, it remembers you, and it waits. Because the Whaley House is not merely a place of ghosts, it is a living memory of tragedy, a vessel of sorrow, and anyone who dares to enter becomes part of its story forever.
By the 9th visit, I no longer considered the Whaley House a building. It was something alive, ancient and intelligent, a vessel of centuries of grief, fear, and anger. I knew that stepping inside meant surrendering a part of myself, my nerves, my rationality, my very sense of reality. But I went anyway. Some compulsion I could not resist, some thread tying me to this house that was older than the memories it held. The door creaked open, and the foyer swallowed me like a mouth. The cold hit immediately, sharper than ever, carrying a metallic tang that clung to my lungs. Shadows pooled in the corners, thick and oily, moving independently of the fading daylight. The portraits along the walls, faces I had seen countless times, now seemed to scowl, their eyes following my every motion with judgment and expectation. I ascended the stairs slowly, each creaking step a drumbeat announcing my presence. I felt the weight of unseen eyes on my back, pressing, probing. Upstairs, the hall stretched longer than memory suggested, the shadows bending unnaturally along the edges of the walls. Anna Whaley's room beckoned, the door slightly open. I could feel her presence before I even entered, a chilling gravity drawing me forward. Inside, the air was thicker, almost solid, vibrating with energy. I saw her, Anna, standing near the window, more defined than ever. Her eyes were empty wells of sorrow, and her hand reached for me, trembling slightly. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping into a chaotic chorus. Stay, remember, don't leave, listen, feel. I could feel them pressing into my skull, trying to overwhelm my mind, my reason, my courage. Then came the floorboards above, a rapid, erratic pounding. Yankee Jim Robinson. Each step echoed like a drumbeat in the hallways, vibrating through the walls and into my chest. His presence radiated anger and fury, centuries of injustice solidified into a tangible force. I could feel him behind me, circling, hunting, watching, his shadow stretching across the room like a living thing. Suddenly, the old piano in the corner began to play itself, keys striking violently, the melody dissonant and mournful. Chairs toppled, a vase shattered, and the room seemed to pulse, alive with energy. Shadows coalesced into humanoid forms, hundreds of them, overlapping and writhing, faces twisted in silent screams. I was pressed to my knees, my vision blurred, my body trembling uncontrollably. Thomas Whaley appeared next, emerging from a corner shadow, rigid, commanding. His eyes met mine, unreadable but intense, as if he were assessing my worth, my courage, my ability to survive this night. I realized then that the Whaley House was not merely haunted, it was testing me, drawing out my limits, forcing me to confront centuries of grief, injustice, and tragedy stored within its walls. Then, all at once, the room seemed to collapse inward. Shadows twisted violently, multiple figures overlapping. Anna, Yankee Jim, Thomas, and others I could not name, all converging, their voices merging into a deafening roar. The cold pressed into me like ice water. Hands brushed my arms, shoulders, even my face. I felt my mind teetering on the edge of something dark, something irreversible. The house was no longer observing. It was active, alive, asserting its power.
I screamed, but no sound came. My voice was swallowed by the energy of the house, by the weight of its memory. My heart raced, my lungs burned with effort. I could feel the sorrow, the rage, the fear of every spirit pressing into me, demanding recognition, demanding remembrance. Every tragic event that had unfolded here, the executions, the illnesses, the losses, the grief, was alive, a presence that enveloped me entirely. I stumbled backward, disoriented, nearly falling, my body trembling uncontrollably. The room pulsed with life, shadows surging and receding, whispering names and dates, events long past. I realized with a cold, paralyzing clarity, the Whaley House does not merely haunt, it enfolds, it engulfs, it integrates its visitors into its memory, forcing them to witness, to remember, to exist within the tragedy of its past. When I finally staggered out into the foggy night, gasping for air, my body shaking, I knew I had survived, but only barely. The house had released me, but only partially. A piece of me had been left inside, tethered to its memory, bound to its whispers. And I knew, without a doubt, that I would return, because once the Whaley House calls, there is no turning away.
By the 10th visit, I was no longer a mere observer of the Whaley House. I had become part of it, whether I wanted to or not. Every creak of the floorboards, every shifting shadow, every whisper from the walls reminded me that I was entwined with its memory, bound to its ghosts. And yet, a force deeper than fear compelled me to return, an unrelenting desire to witness the full scope of the house's story, to confront the darkness that had claimed generations of the Whaley family and countless others who had crossed its threshold. The moment I stepped through the front door, I felt it, the house exhaling, alive with anticipation. The air was thick and sharp, smelling of old wood, decayed flowers, and faint iron, the remnants of lives lost, of blood spilled, of sorrow preserved in the very structure. The portraits on the walls seemed almost to lean forward, their eyes narrowing, silently judging me for daring to enter once more. I ascended the stairs deliberately, each creaking step announcing my presence like a drumbeat in the silence. Upstairs, the hallway stretched impossibly long, shadows pooling in corners like living ink. Anna Whaley's room awaited, the door standing slightly ajar, light filtering in thin, ghostly streaks. I could feel her presence stronger than ever, a weight pressing against my chest, a coldness that reached deep into my bones. Inside, the room was alive with energy. Anna stood near the window, more real and more sorrowful than I had ever seen her. Her eyes bore into mine, empty wells of grief and accusation, and she raised her hand slowly, beckoning me closer. The whispers returned, hundreds of voices overlapping, crying, pleading, demanding remembrance. Remember, stay, feel, don't leave. Each word drilled into my consciousness, an unbearable pressure of centuries of grief. Then chaos erupted. From every corner, shadows surged forward. Yankee Jim Robinson, Thomas Whaley, countless indistinct forms, all pressing toward me. Their faces were grotesque and blurred, twisted by anguish, anger, and despair.
The piano in the corner began to play a frantic, discordant melody, keys striking themselves violently. Chairs toppled, vases shattered, and the floorboards groaned as though the house itself were alive, thrashing around me, asserting its dominance. I tried to flee, to escape, but the house had me. Invisible hands pressed on my shoulders, tugged at my arms, even brushed against my face. The temperature dropped further, my breath clouding in front of me. Shadows stretched impossibly, twisting into forms I could not fully comprehend. Yet every movement screamed threat, warning, memory. The Whaley House was no longer a place, it was an entity, sentient and all-encompassing, and I was caught in its memory, trapped between its past and present. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the torrent of history pressing into me. I could feel sorrow, betrayal, injustice, and fear flooding my mind like a river of ice. The house demanded I witness, demanded I feel, demanded I understand every tragedy that had ever unfolded within its walls. Faces of the dead pressed into the corners of my vision, whispering names, dates, and secrets I could barely comprehend. Then, through the chaos, Thomas Whaley appeared, rigid and commanding, standing at the far wall. His gaze locked onto mine, and I understood. He was neither angry nor welcoming, simply patient, a sentinel of memory. The house pulsed around him, alive with the cumulative weight of every life, every death, every sorrow it had witnessed. It was showing me everything, forcing me to confront the entirety of its existence in a single, overwhelming moment. And then silence. The shadows withdrew, the whispers faded, and the house exhaled a slow, deliberate breath. I rose shakily to my feet, exhausted, trembling, my mind reeling. I had seen the full power of the Whaley House, and I understood its true nature. It does not merely haunt, it remembers. It integrates, it absorbs, it tests, and it marks anyone who dares enter. I had survived, barely, but a part of me would remain forever, tethered to the memories, the sorrow, and the spirits trapped within these walls. As I stepped back into the foggy night, the Whaley House stood silent, calm, almost serene, but I knew better. Its presence lingered, watching, waiting, patient. It had claimed another witness, another piece of consciousness to carry its story. And I would return again, whether I wanted to or not, because once the whispers of the Whaley House reach you, they never truly let go. The house does not forget, and neither will I.